The first shot cracked through the afternoon quiet like a whip. Mason Redwood didn't think. He just moved. His Colt was in his hand before the sound even registered, his body already turning toward the three men standing in the middle of Silver Creek's main street. Their dusters flapped in the hot New Mexico wind. It was 1878, and peace had just died. "Redwood," the man in the center spat, his voice like gravel. "Colonel Hawkins sends his regards." The name hit Mason harder than a bullet. Before he could process it, 3 more shots rang out. And then, silence. Mason was the only one left standing. The leader gasped one last thing as he fell into the dust. "Hawkins, he'll find you." Sheriff Nathan Cooper stepped out from the shadows, his badge glinting in the sun. Those were Hawkins's men. "They were waiting for me, Nathan," Mason said, his hands steady as he holstered his Colt. But inside, a storm was raging. 7 years. 7 years of quiet, shattered in 30 seconds of gunfire. "You recognize them?" Cooper asked, kneeling by one of the bodies. "7th Cavalry," Mason said. Not his old unit. He turned over the man's wrist, and there it was. A small tattoo of a hawk with its talons out. Hawkins's mark. Thought that business was buried deep. Mason's laugh was hollow, empty. "Some graves don't stay filled, Nathan." Cooper looked at his friend, his face etched with worry. "You want to tell me what this is all about?" "Old debts," Mason said, his gaze fixed on the edge of town, where his ranch sat silent and empty, just like it had been for 7 long years. "Nothing for you to worry about." "3 dead men in my street says different," Cooper shot back. "I'll be at the ranch if you need a statement." Mason was already turning away. "Mason!" Cooper called out. "Whatever's coming, you don't have to face it alone." But Mason didn't stop. He just kept walking. Alone was all he knew anymore. The 5-mile ride back to the Redwood Ranch was a blur of dust and ghosts. Mason pushed his horse harder than he needed to, trying to outrun the name echoing in his head with every hoofbeat. Hawkins. 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 Colonel Roland Hawkins. A man he served under in the war. A man who was supposed to be a part of his past. A past he'd tried to bury. The ranch house appeared against the darkening sky, a 2-story silhouette of broken dreams. He'd built these walls with his own 2 hands, for a family that never was, for the laughter of a wife he'd lost, for the footsteps of children he'd never have. It wasn't a home, it was a tomb. Inside, he moved through the silent rooms like a ghost himself. He hung his gun belt by the door, just like Rebecca always made him do. In the kitchen, he poured a whiskey and downed it in one go. The burn in his throat was nothing compared to the fire in his soul. He pulled a leather journal from a shelf. For 7 years, he'd written the same words every single day. Day 2557 without Rebecca. He stared at the page, pen in hand. Then, he added a new line. "Hawkins has found me." As the sun bled out behind the mountains, Mason watched the darkness swallow his land. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that somewhere out there, old enemies were on the hunt. And he was the prey. A week later, the sky turned brown. The worst dust storm in 5 years descended on Silver Creek, erasing the world outside Mason's windows. And that's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A sound that froze him in his tracks. A baby's cry. He grabbed his shotgun, tied a bandana over his face, and plunged into the screaming wind. The storm hit him like a fist. He could barely see 5 feet in front of him. But the crying got louder, pulling him toward the corral. "Hello!" he shouted, but the wind stole his voice. "Is anyone there?" Then he saw it. A shape huddled against the corral fence, too big to be an animal. As he got closer, he saw it was a woman, curled around a small bundle in her arms. "Ma'am," he called out. "Are you all right?" Her head snapped up. Her face was a mess of blood and dirt, her dark eyes wide with terror. She saw the shotgun, then his face, and clutched the bundle even tighter. "Stay back," she rasped, her voice raw. She had an accent. Mexican, maybe Spanish. Mason deliberately set the shotgun down and raised his empty hands. "I'm not going to hurt you. This is my ranch. Let me get you inside." Her eyes darted past him, searching the swirling dust for someone else. The bundle in her arms moved, and another weak cry escaped. "Your baby needs shelter," Mason said, taking a cautious step forward. "This storm could last for days." She was frozen for a long moment. Then the baby cried again, a pitiful, desperate sound. Something inside her broke. She gave a single sharp nod. She struggled to her feet, swaying, refusing his help. Her dress was torn, stained with blood. A deep cut ran along her cheekbone. "My son," she managed, her voice a whisper. "He's only 4 months old. He hasn't had water since yesterday." The baby's cries had faded to whimpers. That sound tightened something in Mason's chest he thought had died 7 years ago. Inside, she collapsed into a kitchen chair, still clutching the baby. "Water," she begged, looking at the infant, not herself. Mason brought a cup, helping her give the baby a few sips. "He needs milk," she said, desperation in her voice. "Do you have a cow? A goat?" "Goat's milk in the cellar," Mason replied, "watered down and warm." As he prepared it, the woman rocked her son, murmuring to him in Spanish. "What's your name, ma'am?" Mason asked. She hesitated. "Isabella," she finally said. "Isabella Diaz. This is Gabriel. Mason Redwood. This is my ranch." She fed Gabriel, relief washing over her face. Only then did she drink the water he offered. "You're hurt," Mason said, gesturing to the cut on her face. "It's nothing," she said. "I've had worse." The casual way she said it told him more than a book ever could. He insisted on cleaning the wound, gathering supplies. As she tended to her face, he stoked the fire and put on coffee. "How did you end up here?" he asked. "In the middle of this storm." "We were traveling to Santa Fe," she said, her voice careful. "Got caught in the storm." It was a lie, or at least not the whole truth. His ranch was miles off the main road. No one stumbled upon it by accident. "There's a bedroom upstairs," he said, deciding not to push. "You and your son can rest there." "Thank you," she said, her eyes wide. "But we'll leave as soon as the storm breaks." "That could be days," Mason pointed out. "And you're in no condition to travel." She looked down at Gabriel, then back at Mason. "Why would you help us? Strangers?" The question caught him off guard. Why indeed? For 7 years he'd kept the world at arm's length. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said. She studied his face, searching for the lie. When she found none, she nodded slowly. "Just until the storm passes." But Mason had a feeling this woman and her child had brought a storm with them far more dangerous than the one raging outside, and it was about to break right over his head. Mason was awake before the sun, an old habit he couldn't break. He was on his second coffee when he heard a floorboard creak. Isabella stood by the back door, Gabriel clutched in one arm, a small, sharp knife in her other hand. Her eyes were wide, filled with a desperate, cornered fear. "I need to leave now," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, just let us go." "The storm's still blowing," he said calmly, not moving a muscle. "It's not safe out there for a baby." "It's not safe in here either," she shot back. "They'll come looking for us." "Who will? Don't pretend you don't know." The knife shook in her hand. "Hawkins's men. That's why you helped us, isn't it? To collect whatever reward he's offering." The name was a punch to the gut. Hawkins. "Roland Hawkins," he said, and something in his voice made her pause. You're not working for him?" "No," Mason said, the word coming out like a piece of iron. "I'm about the last man on earth who'd work for Roland Hawkins." "Then you know who he is." "I know him." He gestured to a chair. "Sit down. That knife won't do you much good, and you look like you're about to fall over." She hesitated, then slowly lowered the knife. "We served together," Mason explained. "During the war. I was a scout for his unit." "You were friends?" Suspicion crept back into her voice. "We were soldiers," he said, making the distinction clear. "Why is Hawkins after you?" Isabella flinched. It's just Isabella now. My husband is dead. I'm sorry. Hawkins had him killed, she said, the words hanging in the air like smoke. 3 days ago. Your husband crossed him? Mateo discovered what Hawkins's trading company really does, she said, her voice gaining strength, anger burning through the fear. It's not just cattle. He moves people, women and children, sold across the border like animals. And your husband had proof. She sank into the chair. Ledgers, records, names of officials on his payroll. Mateo was his bookkeeper. Hawkins trusted him because Mateo was Apache. He thought no one would believe him if he talked. But he was going to talk. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Hawkins found out. He made me watch while they... She broke off, clutching Gabriel tighter. They wanted to know where Mateo hid the evidence. Who else knew? Pride hardened her voice. I told them nothing. How did you escape? A guard got careless. I took his knife while he slept. Then I took his horse. The woman had a spine of steel. Mason was impressed. But why come here? To my ranch? Isabella reached into her dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She slid it across the table. Mason unfolded it. A single line of neat handwriting. If anything happens, find Mason Redwood at Silver Creek. He owes me a life. It was signed Mateo Diaz. The name hit him like a ghost from the past. A man he'd met only once, 3 years ago. An Apache man, educated back east. We met tracking rustlers, Mason said, the memory returning. I was ambushed. Would have died if your husband hadn't found me. He tended my wounds, got me back to town. He folded the paper carefully. I asked him why he'd help a white man. He said a man's worth isn't in his blood, but in what he does when no one's watching. A sad smile touched Isabella's lips. That sounds like Mateo. I didn't know he worked for Hawkins. He took the job a year ago. The territorial governor closed the school where we taught, said educating Apache and Mexican children was a waste of money. So you came here because Mateo thought I would help. I had nowhere else to go, she said, looking down at Gabriel. Hawkins wants us both, me, for what I know, and Gabriel. Why the child? Isabella's voice dropped to a whisper. Mateo's parents owned land near here, a silver mine. It passed to Mateo. And now to Gabriel. Hawkins wants it. If we're gone, he can claim to be Gabriel's guardian and take control of everything. Land. It always came back to land and power. The note said, Mason owed Mateo a life. He was right. Will you honor that debt? Isabella's gaze was a challenge. Mason looked at the woman, exhausted but unbroken. He looked at the child in her arms. Helping them meant bringing Hawkins's war right to his doorstep. But saying no meant betraying a good man's memory. It meant turning his back on the only chance he might ever get to face the demons that had haunted him for 7 long years. Yes, he said finally. I'll help you. Both of you. Relief flooded Isabella's face. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Mason warned. Hawkins doesn't give up, and if he's looking for you, he'll find you, even here. I know, Isabella said, her chin lifting, but I'm tired of running. Outside, the dust storm was finally starting to die down. But Mason Redwood knew the real storm hadn't even started yet. The nightmare came for him again that night. The frantic ride, the horse slick with sweat, the sky boiling with impossible clouds, the desperate sprint to the house, the door splintering as he threw himself against it, calling her name, Rebecca, and then the bedroom, the air thick with sickness, Rebecca pale and burning with fever, her hand reaching for his. You're here, she'd whisper, a terrible relief in her voice, and then the words that had haunted his every waking moment for 7 years. I held on as long as I could. Mason woke up drenched in sweat, tangled in his sheets. For a moment, he was back in that small cabin 7 years ago. Then reality crashed in, the big, empty ranch house. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. He found Isabella in the kitchen, Gabriel cradled in her arm. There's coffee, she said quietly. And I made biscuits. The simple domestic scene felt like it belonged to another man's life. A table set for 2, food he hadn't made, It was an intrusion of life into the mausoleum he called home. They ate in silence, a comfortable quiet broken only by Gabriel's happy gurgles. "You said Hawkins was your commanding officer," Isabella said, breaking the silence. "During the war," Mason confirmed. "For a year, I was a scout for his unit." Mateo said he was a monster. "He was effective," Mason said, his voice hard. "Got results, no matter the cost. Some called it leadership. I called it cruelty dressed up as duty. He'd burn a whole village to the ground if it meant achieving his objective. He took that same ruthlessness into the world of business after the war." "You despise him," she stated. It wasn't a question. "I do." "But you served under him." "War makes you do things you're not proud of," Mason said. "Following his orders was one of them." Isabella studied him, her gaze thoughtful, not judging. "What happened between you two? There's more to it than that." He had never told a soul. He'd carried the weight of it alone. "Rebecca." "My wife," he started, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "She died 7 years ago, while I was away." He forced the words out. "She came down with a fever. Sent for me. But I was 3 days' ride away, tracking rustlers." "Rustlers working for Hawkins," Isabella guessed. Mason nodded. "I didn't know it at the time. By the time I got back—" He couldn't finish. "She was gone," Isabella said softly. "I should have been here," Mason choked out, the guilt as fresh as it was 7 years ago. "The neighbors said she kept asking for me, asking when I'd be home." "You couldn't have known." "Doesn't change the fact she died alone, while I was off chasing shadows." "Is that why you live like this?" she asked, her directness startling him. "As some kind of penance?" "Maybe," he admitted. "Or maybe I'm just not fit company for anyone anymore." "My husband trusted you," she said, her gaze steady. "He was a good judge of character." Isabella stood up, gathering their plates. "Perhaps he saw you more clearly than you see yourself." Mason didn't have an answer for that. She was right, though. She carried her own guilt, the burden of being the one who survived. "Hawkins will come," he said, changing the subject. "When he does, you need to be ready." "Ready how? Can you shoot?" Isabella's expression hardened. "I can learn." "Good," Mason nodded. "We'll start today." He caught his reflection in the window. A stranger stared back. A man whose life of quiet grief had been shattered. For 7 years he'd just been surviving. Now, with danger riding toward his ranch, with 2 innocent lives to protect, he felt a spark ignite in the dead ashes of his soul. It wasn't hope. He was long past that. It was something else. A purpose. For 2 weeks, a new rhythm took hold of the ranch. The silence was broken by Gabriel's laughter, the emptiness filled by Isabella's presence. One morning, Mason placed his old Henry rifle on the breakfast table. "Time you learned to use this," he said. Isabella didn't look surprised. "You think they're coming soon?" "I know Hawkins," Mason said. "He never gives up." Out by the corral, he set up tin cans on the fence posts. "Ever fired a gun before?" "My father's shotgun," she said, her jaw tightening. "When I was 14. Men came to our farm in Mexico." She didn't need to say more. He showed her how to stand, how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger, not pull it. Her first shot went wide. The recoil startled her. But she reset herself, adjusted her stance, and fired again. The second shot clipped a can, sending it spinning. The third shot sent it flying off the post. Mason raised an eyebrow. "You're a quick study." "I've always been a good student," she said with a hint of pride. They kept practicing, and with every shot, she grew more confident, more deadly. "How did you meet Mateo?" he asked while reloading. A real smile touched her lips, transforming her face. "At the mission school in Santa Fe. I was teaching reading. He was teaching mathematics and languages." Pride filled her voice. "He was brilliant. The first Apache man to graduate from Harvard. That couldn't have been easy." "Nothing was ever easy for him," she said. "But he believed knowledge was the one thing no one could ever take from you." Later, as Isabella nursed Gabriel, Mason asked the question that had been bothering him. Why would a Harvard man work as a bookkeeper for someone like Hawkins? Isabella's face darkened. The territorial governor cut the funding for the schools for native children. Hawkins offered him a job. Mateo had a family on the way. He took it, hating every minute. He thought he could do more good from the inside, find out how his operation worked. And he found out, Mason said. Human trafficking, she confirmed, her voice hard as steel. Children torn from their parents, women sold to mining camps. Mateo couldn't let it stand. He started copying records, gathering evidence, but someone betrayed him. She described Mateo's last hours in a flat, emotionless voice. How they'd tortured him for information. How he'd refused to break, protecting her and the others who knew. The last thing he told me, she finished, was to find you. He said Mason Redwood was a man who understood honor. The weight of that trust was heavy. I'll keep you and Gabriel safe, Mason promised. But I'm not the man your husband thought I was. Isabella looked at him, her gaze piercing. Perhaps, she said, you're not the man you think you are, either. That afternoon, he rode into town for supplies. The shopkeeper, a man named Henderson, leaned over the counter. Heard you had some excitement out your way during that storm. Just dust, Mason said, his face a mask. Funny, Henderson said, glancing toward the door, because there are men in town asking about a Mexican woman and a baby gone missing from Santa Fe, offering a big reward. Ice flowed through Mason's veins. Wouldn't know anything about it. Of course not, the shopkeeper said. Just thought you should know. Outside, Mason's mind raced. Hawkins's men were already here. Their time was running out. He found Sheriff Cooper at the stables. Hawkins has men in town, Cooper confirmed, his face grim. 6 of them staying at the Grand Hotel. They've been watching your ranch from the ridge to the east. Mason cursed. They would have seen him teaching Isabella to shoot. They knew she was there. There's something else, Cooper said, his voice pained. My son, Caleb. He's working for Hawkins. Mason stopped dead. Caleb. I thought he was studying law. Came home 6 months ago. Took a position as Hawkins's assistant. Says he's learning about contract law. Does he know what kind of man he's working for? That's the thing, Cooper said, fear in his eyes. I'm not sure if he finds out. He didn't have to finish. If Caleb discovered the truth, Hawkins would silence him, just like he silenced Mateo. The sheriff was caught in an impossible position. Mason, Cooper said, his hand on Mason's shoulder. They outnumber you. And Hawkins doesn't play by the rules. Neither do I, Mason said, his voice cold. Not anymore. He rode home, a lone rider shadowing him from a distance. A message. We see you. We're always watching. Isabella met him at the door. One look at his face told her everything. They know, she said. They've been watching the ranch, he confirmed. We don't have long. A day, maybe 2. He led her to the root cellar. Behind a stack of crates, he revealed a hidden trap door in the floor. My father was an abolitionist, Mason explained, pride in his voice. This was part of the Underground Railroad. He lit a lantern and led her down into a narrow tunnel. It opened into a small, hidden room beneath the barn. It was stocked with food, water, a cot, a secret sanctuary. If they come to the house, he said, you and Gabriel hide here. You've thought of everything, she said, her voice filled with awe. Not everything, he admitted. But it's a start. As they returned to the house, an old war wound in his side began to throb. You're hurt, Isabella noticed immediately. Old injury, he dismissed. Let me see. Her tone left no room for argument. She examined the puckered scar, her touch gentle. It's inflamed. She prepared a poultice of dried herbs, a remedy learned from Mateo's mother. The relief was immediate. Thank you, he said. As she worked, he told her everything. The watchers on the ridge, Cooper's son, the reward. When he was done, she looked down at Gabriel, sleeping in her arms. I won't run any more. she said, her voice low but firm. Mateo died standing up to Hawkins. I won't dishonor his memory by spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. It's 6 against 1, Mason pointed out. Then we changed the odds, she said, her gaze meeting his. You were a scout, a fighter. Teach me what I need to know. We'll find allies, people who will stand against Hawkins once they know the truth. Her determination was a fire, and it lit a spark in him. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun went down. Then Gabriel laughed, a bright, bubbling sound of pure joy. It cut through the armor around Mason's heart. And Mason Redwood, the man who hadn't truly smiled in 7 years, felt the corners of his mouth turn up. He had no idea that in just 1 week his world would be shattered all over again. A week later, Gabriel got sick. A fever that burned so hot it felt like you could cook an egg on his skin. Isabella was frantic, trying every remedy she knew, but nothing worked. The baby's cries grew weaker, more pitiful. The panic in Isabella's eyes was a mirror of the helplessness Mason had felt, watching Rebecca fade away. He wouldn't let it happen again. He rode like a madman to Silver Creek, pounding on the doctor's door until a sleepy Doc Wilson appeared. Baby, Mason gasped. High fever. They rode back even faster, the doctor's bag bouncing. Wilson diagnosed it as a summer fever, common but dangerous for an infant. He left medicine and instructions. All night, Mason and Isabella kept vigil. They took turns holding Gabriel, bathing his small body in cool water. Near dawn, the fever finally broke. As the first light of morning crept into the kitchen, Isabella looked at him, her face etched with exhaustion. You would have been a good father, she said quietly. The words hit him like a physical blow. We were going to have a child, he admitted, his voice rough. Rebecca was 5 months along when she died. I'm sorry, she whispered. Does it ever get easier? She asked later, her own grief for Mateo still raw. Different, Mason answered honestly. Not easier. Like learning to walk with a missing limb. You adapt, but you never stop feeling what's gone. That evening they sat on the porch. We can't stay here forever, Isabella said. Hawkins will find us. You're welcome as long as you need, he said, surprised by how much he meant it. Why? She asked, her gaze direct. And don't say it's because you owed Mateo. There's more to it. He gave her the honest answer. For 7 years I've just been existing. You and Gabriel. You reminded me there's still something good in this world worth fighting for. Her hand found his in the darkness, a simple touch that spoke volumes. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet of the ranch, Mason felt more alive than he had in a very long time. But their peace was short-lived. 2 days later, Mason found fresh cigarette butts in the barn. Someone had been inside, watching the house. They'd been so focused on Gabriel they'd gotten careless. He didn't tell Isabella. Instead, he unlocked a storeroom he hadn't opened in years. Inside was the life he'd left behind. Maps, knives, and his prized Sharps rifle, the most accurate long-distance weapon of its day. The tools of a man who moved through the shadows. Isabella found him there. You were more than just a scout, she said, taking in the arsenal. I was what the army needed me to be, he said, his voice flat. Mateo told me stories about special units, she said. Men who operated behind enemy lines. His silence was her answer. That's why Hawkins valued you, she realized, and why he didn't want you to just walk away. He told her about the cigarette butts. We don't have much time. They spent the afternoon stalking the hidden room beneath the barn. He showed her the emergency exit, a narrow tunnel that came out in a dry creek bed a 1/4 mile away. If anything happens to me, he said, take Gabriel and follow the creek bed west to the mission. Father Miguel will help you. Before she could argue, they heard it. The unmistakable sound of approaching horses. It's too soon, Isabella whispered. Stay here, Mason ordered, already climbing the ladder back into the barn. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. He moved to a small window, his rifle ready, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't Hawkins's men. It was Sheriff Cooper, and riding beside him was his son, Caleb. "Hawkins is coming," Cooper said as soon as they were inside the house. "Tomorrow, with at least 10 men." "How do you know?" "I told him," Caleb spoke up, his voice steady despite the nervousness in his eyes. "I've been working in Hawkins's office, gathering evidence." It was a stunning reveal. Caleb wasn't a collaborator. He was a spy. "Hawkins has the territorial marshal in his pocket," Cooper explained. "Caleb has been our only chance." Caleb pulled a small journal from his jacket. "Enough to hang him twice over. Trafficking, bribery, murder, including the murder of Mateo Diaz." "And I found this in his private files," Caleb added, pulling out another paper. It was a wanted poster for Mason Redwood, dated 7 years ago. The charges: desertion, theft, and murder. "It's a fake," Cooper said quickly, "but it gives him the legal cover to come onto your property, tear this place apart, and take you into custody." Their time had just run out. They had to leave. Mason knew a place, an old line shack in the foothills, defensible and hidden. But as they planned, Caleb asked Isabella a question that changed everything. "Did your husband have any special hiding places? For documents?" Isabella's brow furrowed. "He wore a silver cross. It was hollow. He kept a small key inside, but Hawkins's men took it from his body." Caleb nodded. "I'll look for it. It might still be in Hawkins's office." As darkness fell, Mason and Isabella packed essentials. They would ride to the line shack that night, using back trails only Mason knew. "Are you sure about this?" Isabella asked, her face troubled in the lantern light. "You've risked so much." "This isn't just about you and Gabriel anymore," Mason said. "Hawkins and I have unfinished business." "Revenge won't bring Rebecca back," she said softly. "This isn't about revenge," he said, though he knew it wasn't entirely true. "It's about justice." Her hand found his. "Promise me," she said, "that you won't lose yourself in this. The man you are now, he's worth saving." Before he could answer, she rose on her toes and kissed him. A gentle, unexpected kiss that felt like a promise. Then they rode out, 3 shadows under the New Mexico moon, heading straight into the heart of the storm. The line shack was a one-room cabin backed against a rocky hillside, nearly invisible. It was their fortress. For 3 days, they lived on high alert. Mason scouted the perimeter while Isabella cared for Gabriel. "I was thinking," Isabella said one afternoon. "The night before they took us, Mateo said something strange. He said, 'The truth is in the heart of the Silver Virgin.'" "A code?" Mason wondered. "The mission in Silver Creek," she realized, her eyes wide. "There's a silver statue of the Virgin Mary in the sanctuary." It was a long shot, but it was all they had. But Silver Creek was the one place they couldn't go. It would be crawling with Hawkins's men. Before they could debate it, they heard the sound of horses. Mason took position behind a boulder, his Sharps rifle ready. It was just a hunting party, but it was a warning. They weren't as safe as they thought. Just then, a sharp whistle cut through the air. 3 short bursts, 1 long. It was Cooper's signal. A lone rider emerged from the trees. It was Caleb, his horse lathered and heaving. He looked exhausted and terrified. "Hawkins knows," he said as soon as he was inside. "About me. He caught me copying documents. I barely got away." He pulled an oilskin packet from his jacket. "But I got what we needed." Inside were ledgers and contracts, proof of Hawkins's human trafficking. "There's more," Caleb told Isabella. "I found your husband's cross. The key led to a strongbox hidden in the mission church. The documents are safe with my father." "Then why are you here?" Mason demanded. "Why not with the marshals?" Caleb's face darkened. "Because Hawkins figured it out. He sent men to Silver Creek. They've taken my father." Isabella gasped. "They've arrested the sheriff?" Mason was stunned. "On what charge?" "Obstructing justice," Caleb said bitterly. "Hawkins plans to transfer him to Santa Fe tomorrow, where a judge in his pocket will make sure he never gets a fair trial." They had until morning. "We have to free him," Mason said. "It's a suicide mission," Isabella protested. "The town will be swarming with his men." Which is why they won't expect it, Mason countered. A plan, audacious and desperate, began to form in his mind. That night, as they prepared, Isabella pulled him outside. "If something happens tomorrow," she said, her voice soft, "I want you to know. These last few weeks have been a gift. You deserve a future, Mason. One with joy in it." She kissed him again, a kiss filled with fear and hope. He knew then that he wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. He was fighting for her, for Gabriel, for the future she spoke of. He was fighting for a life he never thought he'd have again. They rode into Silver Creek before dawn, moving like ghosts through the dry creek bed. The plan was insane. Caleb would go to the church to secure the rest of the evidence with Father Miguel. Isabella and Gabriel would hide at the doctor's house, and Mason would walk into the lion's den and free the sheriff. He found Cooper in the jail, tied to a chair and badly beaten. A single guard stood over him. Mason took the guard by surprise, tying him up and freeing the sheriff. "Took you long enough," Cooper croaked. They slipped out the back, making for the church. Shouts erupted behind them. They'd been discovered. They stumbled into the church just as Hawkins's men began a door-to-door search of the town. "They know we're here," Caleb said, his face pale. Mason's blood ran cold. Isabella and Gabriel. They were at the doctor's house, right in the path of the search. "I have to go to them," he said. "You'll be killed," Caleb protested. But it was too late. The church door burst open. It was Doc Wilson, his face ashen. "They found them," he gasped. "Hawkins has them. In the middle of the street. He's calling for you." Mason's world narrowed to a single point. "How many men?" "At least 10, the doctor stammered. "All armed." Impossible odds, but he didn't hesitate. "I'm going." "Not alone," Caleb said, checking his pistol. In the middle of Main Street, Roland Hawkins stood with Isabella and Gabriel held at gunpoint. "Redwood!" he roared. "Show yourself or they die!" Mason stepped out into the harsh sunlight, his hands raised. "I'm here, Hawkins! Let them go!" A slow, predatory smile spread across Hawkins's face. "It's been a long time, Mason." "They're not part of this," Mason said, walking slowly forward. "On the contrary," Hawkins sneered. "The woman is a witness, and the child is the heir to a silver mine I intend to own." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "But you and I have unfinished business. You took something that belonged to me 7 years ago. I took nothing." "Liar!" Hawkins's composure finally cracked. "My dispatch case! You stole it the night you deserted!" Mason was confused. He vaguely remembered a leather case. "I don't have it." "It's over, Hawkins!" Caleb's voice shouted from a hotel window above. He held up the oilskin packet of evidence. "I've sent copies to every federal office from here to Washington. Killing us won't save you." Doubt flickered in the eyes of Hawkins's men. "Your men aren't fools, Hawkins," Mason called out. "They know when a ship is sinking." The man holding Isabella loosened his grip. That was all she needed. She slammed her elbow into his ribs, spun away, and ran for cover, clutching Gabriel tight. All hell broke loose. Hawkins fired at Mason, the bullet tearing through his arm. Mason dropped, pulling a hidden derringer from his boot and firing back. Gunfire erupted from everywhere. Caleb provided covering fire from the hotel. Sheriff Cooper, bloody but on his feet, took down one of Hawkins's men from the church doorway. Mason scrambled behind a water trough, blood pouring from his arm. Through the chaos, he saw Isabella and Gabriel make it safely inside the general store. "Redwood!" Hawkins screamed, his voice pure rage. "Face me!" Just then, a new voice cut through the gunfire. "Roland Hawkins, this is U.S. Marshal James Blackwood. You're surrounded. Surrender now." Federal marshals, 6 of them, advancing from the end of the street. Hawkins was trapped, cornered, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. He burst from cover, his pistol blazing. "You took everything from me!" he screamed, charging at Mason. Time slowed. Mason saw the wild panic in Hawkins's eyes. This wasn't about business anymore. This was about a broken man's last, desperate act. Mason raised the small derringer, its single shot all he had left. "This is for Rebecca," he whispered. The Derringer's crack was small, almost lost in the noise. Hawkins staggered, a look of pure disbelief on his face. He looked down at the small, crimson flower blooming on his chest. "I was building an empire," he gasped. "You built nothing," Mason said. "You only destroyed." Hawkins crumpled into the dust of the street he'd tried to own. Silence fell. Then, one by one, his remaining men threw down their guns. It was over. Mason swayed, the world going gray at the edges. A strong hand grabbed him. It was Cooper. "Easy, Redwood. We won." Across the street, Isabella emerged from the store, Gabriel safe in her arms. Their eyes met. "No," Mason said, his voice rough. "It's just beginning." In the church, as the doctor stitched his arm, Marshal Blackwood explained. Caleb's evidence, sent ahead 3 days prior, had been enough to bring them running. But there was still a mystery. Hawkins's dispatch case. "Maybe not," said Father Miguel. He brought forward a small wooden box found in Mateo's hidden strongbox. Carved on the lid was a hawk with outstretched talons. Inside were forged land deeds, blackmail material, and a small, leather-bound journal. Hawkins's private journal. Mason opened it. His eyes fell on an entry dated 7 years earlier. "Redwood remains troublesome. His investigation into the rustling threatens our operation. Steps taken to neutralize. Messenger intercepted. Wife's condition to be left untreated. Without her, he will either fall in line or self-destruct." The world fell away. Hawkins hadn't just let Rebecca die. He had murdered her. He had intercepted the message calling Mason home, ensuring she would die alone, all to break him. The grief and guilt of 7 years transformed into pure, cold rage. But then he looked up and saw Isabella, her eyes filled with compassion. He saw Gabriel, reaching a small hand toward his mother's face. Rebecca was gone, but they were here, alive, and because of him, they were safe. The weeks that followed were a blur of rebuilding. The ranch, damaged by Hawkins's men, was slowly brought back to life by Mason, Isabella, and neighbors, who were no longer afraid. One crisp autumn day, Sheriff Cooper and Caleb rode out with news. The last of Hawkins's associates were behind bars, and the territorial legislature had approved funding for a new school in Silver Creek, a school open to all children. "They're looking for a headmistress," Cooper said, smiling at Isabella. "Your name was the first one suggested." Isabella was stunned. It was the dream she and Mateo had shared. "You should take it," Mason told her later, though the thought of her leaving was a knife in his gut. "But what about us?" she asked, her gaze searching his. "Whatever this is between us." He took a deep breath, finally ready to step out of the shadows of his past. "It's the beginning of a family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "If that's what you want too." Her answer was a kiss, soft and full of promise. "I think," she whispered, "that Rebecca would want you to be happy." That evening as the sun set, Mason gave her a simple silver ring, forged from the first silver taken from Gabriel's mine. "I don't want to erase the past," he said, "but I want to build a future. With you, with Gabriel, if you'll have me." "Yes," she whispered, tears in her eyes as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Yes, I will." Gabriel reached out, his small hands connecting them both. A new family, forged in fire and loss, now looking toward a future bright with hope. Mason Redwood, the man who thought his life was over, had found his redemption, not in vengeance, but in love. If you enjoyed this story of justice and new beginnings, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button for more tales from the Wild West.